The stars burned cold and distant beyond the massive windows of Station Helix 9. And inside the great halls of the Galactic Union Academy, cadets from 100 different worlds walked together through corridors that smelled of recycled air and alien flowers. Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the observation deck with his hands clasped behind his back, watching a cargo ship drift slowly toward the docking bay far below. And he felt the familiar weight of loneliness that had followed him. Since his first day at this place, he was the only human in his entire class. And sometimes he wondered if he was the only human who had ever felt so small among creatures that could crush steel with their bare hands or read minds with a single thought. The Academy had accepted him 2 years ago when the Galactic Union had finally decided that humanity was ready to join the larger community of intelligent species, and Marcus had worked harder than anyone else just to earn his place here, studying late into every night cycle and training until his muscles screamed for rest. But no matter how hard he worked, the other cadets still looked at him like he was some kind of strange pet that had wandered into a place where it did not belong. "Hey, look at the little human," a voice called out from behind him. And Marcus did not need to turn around to know who it was. Crix was a Torvanian, a massive reptilian creature with scales like green armor and arms thick as tree trunks. And he had made it his personal mission to remind Marcus every single day that humans were the weakest species in the entire academy. Marcus turned slowly to face Crix and the 3 other cadets who always followed him around like loyal hunting dogs. And he kept his face completely calm even though his heart was beating faster in his chest. "What do you want, Crix?" Marcus asked in a steady voice. Crix stepped closer until his shadow fell over Marcus like a dark cloud, and his yellow eyes gleamed with cruel amusement as he looked down at the human who barely reached his chest. "I want to know why they even let your kind into this academy," Crix said with a harsh laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "You have no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom, and your skin is so soft that I could tear it apart with one finger." The other cadets laughed along with their leader, and Marcus noticed that a small crowd had started to gather around them, watching with curious eyes to see what would happen next. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that caught the light from the overhead panels, and he held it up so that everyone could see what it was. It was a pen, a simple steel fountain pen with a silver clip and a dark blue barrel, and it looked ancient compared to the holographic devices and neural interfaces that the other species used for writing. "What is that pathetic thing?" Crix asked with confusion twisting his features. "It is a pen," Marcus said calmly. "My grandfather gave it to me before I left Earth, and his grandfather gave it to him before that, and it has been in my family for over 200 years. Crix burst out laughing so hard that his whole body shook, and he pointed at the pen like it was the funniest thing he had ever seen in his entire life. "A pen?" Crix howled between laughs. "The human brought a pen to an academy where we train warriors, and he thinks this little stick will help him survive in the real universe." Marcus slipped the pen back into his pocket and looked up at Crix with eyes that held no fear and no anger, just a quiet patience that seemed strange on such a young face. "You know what the difference is between humans and your kind?" Marcus asked softly. Crix stopped laughing and leaned down until his face was just inches away from Marcus, and his breath smelled like copper and old meat. "Tell me, little human," Crix growled. "What could your weak little species possibly have that mine does not?" "We learned how to survive without all the things you were born with," Marcus said. "We had no claws, so we made knives, and we had no armor, so we made walls. And we had no fangs, so we made spears, and we had no wings, so we made ships that could carry us to the stars." Marcus paused and let his words sink into the silence that had fallen over the watching crowd. "Your kind was born with everything it needed," Marcus continued. But my kind had to earn everything we have, and that taught us something that you will never understand. And what is that? Crix demanded with his eyes narrowing dangerously. It taught us how to think, Marcus said simply. It taught us that the most dangerous weapon in the universe is not claws or fangs or venom, but the mind that knows how to use whatever it has. Crix stared at Marcus for a long moment, and something flickered in his yellow eyes that might have been doubt, or might have been the first tiny seed of respect, but then he shook his head and straightened up with a dismissive snort. "Pretty words," Crix said. "But words will not save you when a real predator comes hunting, little human, and when that day comes, I hope I am there to watch you die." Crix turned and walked away with his followers trailing behind him, and the crowd slowly scattered back to their own business. Leaving Marcus alone once again at the observation deck, Marcus pulled out his pen and looked at it for a long moment, remembering his grandfather's weathered hands and the way his eyes had sparkled when he had pressed the pen into Marcus's palm. A human does not need the biggest claws. Boy, his grandfather had said with a smile that held secrets from a lifetime of hard lessons. A human just needs the sharpest mind and the will to use it. Marcus slipped the pen back into his pocket and turned to look out at the stars once more. Out there in the vast darkness between galaxies, something was moving towards Station Helix 9. Something ancient and terrible and hungry for blood. And it had no idea that a single human cadet was standing at its path. Marcus did not know it yet. But in 3 short days, he would prove to the entire universe that humanity had earned its place among the stars, and he would do it with nothing but a pen and the patient mind of a species that had learned to survive. Against all odds, the stars burned cold and distant, beyond the massive windows. But Marcus Cole felt a warmth in his chest that came from knowing exactly who he was and exactly what he was capable of. He was human, and that was enough. It had always been enough. The alarm tore through the silence of the station at exactly 3 hours past midnight, and Marcus woke instantly from a dreamless sleep with his heart already pounding in his chest. Red emergency lights flashed in a rhythm that made the shadows dance like living things across the walls of his small quarters, and the alarm screamed with a sound that Marcus had only ever heard once before, during a training drill. But this was not a drill. Marcus threw himself out of bed and grabbed his uniform from the chair where he had left it the night before, and his fingers found the familiar shape of his grandfather's pen in the pocket. As he pulled the clothes over his body, the station shook with a deep rumble that Marcus felt in his bones. And then all the lights died at once and plunged everything into a darkness so complete that he could not see his own hand in front of his face. Emergency power kicked in a moment later with a soft hum, and dim red lights flickered to life along the floor panels, casting everything in a bloody glow that made the corridor outside his door look like the entrance to some kind of nightmare. Marcus stepped out into the hallway and immediately heard the screaming. It came from somewhere far away, echoing through the metal corridors like the cry of a dying animal. And then it stopped with a wet sound that made Marcus's stomach twist with sudden fear. He pressed himself against the wall and listened with every fiber of his being. And that was when he heard the clicking. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard in person. But he recognized it instantly from the countless hours he had spent studying in the Academy archives, reading about species that the Galactic Union had banned from civilized space. The clicking came from mandibles, massive razor-sharp mandibles that belonged to creatures called the Keth. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. The Kethari were legends among the species of the galaxy, nightmare creatures that evolved on a frozen moon at the edge of known space. And they had earned their reputation as the most perfect killing machines in the entire universe. They stood 7 feet tall with bodies covered in obsidian exoskeletons harder than steel, and their limbs ended in serrated edges that could slice through armor like paper. And their compound eyes could see in total darkness as easily as other species could see in bright daylight. They hunted for sport. They killed for pleasure. And they had never once in recorded history left a single survivor from any of their attacks. And now they were here, inside the academy. And Marcus was alone in a dark corridor with nothing but a pen in his pocket. He heard more screaming from somewhere to his left, and then the sharp sound of energy weapons firing in rapid bursts. And then silence that was somehow worse than the screaming had been Marcus. Forced himself to think clearly through the fear that was trying to take control of his mind. The Kethari were apex predators, the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy, and every instinct in his body was telling him to run and hide and pray that they would not find him. But Marcus was human, and humans had spent millions of years learning how to ignore their instincts. When those instincts would get them killed, he closed his eyes and remembered everything he had read about the Kethari in the Academy database. They hunted in packs of 12, always 12, because that was the sacred number in their culture. And they communicated with each other through a weak telepathic link that let them coordinate their attacks with perfect precision. They had only one weakness: a small membrane at the base of their skulls where the exoskeleton did not fully cover the nerve cluster that connected their brains to their bodies. And a strike to that spot would kill them instantly. Marcus opened his eyes and pulled the pen from his pocket. It was made of solid steel, with a point sharp enough to pierce paper and strong enough to survive 200 years of daily use. And in the dim red light, it looked like a tiny dagger waiting to taste blood. "Okay," Marcus whispered to himself. 12 hunters, one weakness, and I have a pen. He almost laughed at how insane the situation was. But then he heard the clicking again, closer this time. And all thoughts of laughter vanished from his mind. Marcus began to move through the corridors with his back pressed against the wall and his feet making no sound on the metal floor. And he used every trick he had learned from studying Earth's ancient hunters to stay hidden in the shadows. He passed a junction where the bodies of 3 cadets lay twisted on the ground, their blood spreading across the floor in dark pools that reflected the red emergency lights. And Marcus felt grief and rage burn in his chest like twin flames. But he did not stop, because stopping meant dying. And dying meant leaving the other survivors without any chance at all. He reached the archives where he had spent so many hours reading and studying, and he slipped inside through a door that had been left open by someone fleeing in panic. And he took a moment to catch his breath and think about what to do next. The Kethari were hunting through the station, picking off cadets one by one, and the automated defenses were clearly offline because Marcus had not heard a single turret fire since the attack began. Communications were jammed, which meant no one could call for help, and the blast doors were sealed, which meant no one could escape. Marcus was trapped inside a station with 12 perfect killers, and he had nothing but his mind and a 200-year-old pen. He looked down at the pen in his hand and remembered what he had told Crix just a few days ago. The most dangerous weapon in the universe is not claws or fangs or venom, but the mind that knows how to use whatever it has. Marcus tightened his grip on the pen until his knuckles turned white, and a cold calm settled over him like a blanket of fresh snow. He was human, and humans had been fighting against creatures bigger and stronger and deadlier than themselves since the very first days of their existence on Earth. His ancestors had killed mammoths with spears made of stone, and they had hunted lions with nothing but fire and courage. And they had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that had nearly wiped them out a dozen times over. And they had done it all without claws, without fangs, without armor, without any of the gifts that other species took for granted. They had done it with nothing but their minds and their will to survive. Marcus stood up straight in the darkness of the archives, and something changed in his eyes. something that had been sleeping deep inside him since the day he was born. The prey animal was gone, and in its place stood something that the Cathari had never faced before. Human who had decided to stop running and start hunting. Marcus moved toward the door with the pen held ready in his hand. And as he stepped out into the blood-red corridor, he made a silent promise to the cadets who had already died. 12 of them, Marcus whispered into the darkness. And before this night is over, I will kill them all. The clicking echoed through the corridors like a promise of death. But for the first time since the attack began, it was not the Cathari who were doing the promising. Marcus found his first Cathari in the medical wing, and the creature was so focused on stalking a group of wounded cadets that it never even sensed the human climbing through the maintenance shaft above its head. The alien moved with a grace that should have been impossible for something so large, its obsidian body sliding through the shadows like a living nightmare, and its mandibles clicked softly as it tasted the fear in the air. Marcus watched from above and felt no fear of his own, only a cold focus that seemed to sharpen his senses until he could hear his own heartbeat pounding steady and slow in his ears. He had studied the Cathari anatomy for hours in the archives, memorizing every detail about their bodies and their behaviors and their weaknesses. And now, all of that knowledge came together in his mind like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The membrane at the base of the skull was exactly 3 inches wide and located just below the point where the head joined the neck. And it was the only spot on the entire body where the exoskeleton did not provide protection. Marcus waited until the Cathari passed directly beneath him, and then he dropped. He fell through the air in complete silence with the pen gripped tight in his fist, and his eyes locked on that tiny target. And he landed on the creature's back with the force of all his weight behind the blow. The steel point of the pen punched through the membrane like a needle through cloth, and the Cathari died without making a single sound, its body crumpling to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Marcus rolled off the corpse and pulled the pen free with a soft, wet sound, and he looked at the dark blood dripping from the steel tip with eyes that held no emotion at all. 1 down, he whispered. 11 to go. He moved through the station like a ghost, using the maintenance shafts and ventilation ducts that the Cathari were too large to fit through. And he watched the hunters from the shadows as they searched for prey that they did not know had become a predator. The second kill came in the engineering section, where 2 Cathari were working together to corner a group of cadets who had barricaded themselves inside a storage room. Marcus found a panel that controlled the coolant system for that section, and he rerouted the emergency venting protocol to dump freezing gas into the corridor right where the 2 aliens were standing. The Cathari came from a frozen moon and could survive extreme cold, but they could not see through the thick white fog that suddenly filled the air around them. And for just a moment they were blind and confused. Marcus dropped from the ceiling vent behind the first one and drove his pen through its skull membrane before it could react. And then he spun and threw himself at the second one. While it was still trying to locate him through the fog, the creature saw him at the last moment and swung one of its serrated limbs in a strike that should have cut him in half. But Marcus had already ducked beneath the blow and jabbed his pen upward into the soft spot beneath its jaw. The second Cathari fell beside its companion, and Marcus retrieved his pen and disappeared back into the vents before the fog could clear. 3 down, he counted in the darkness. 9 to go. The next 2 kills came in the cargo bay, where Marcus triggered a gravity malfunction that sent the hunters floating helplessly through the air, and he pushed himself off the walls like a swimmer diving through water to reach them before they could adapt to the sudden change. Humans had trained for zero-gravity environments since the earliest days of their space programs, and Marcus moved through the weightless chaos with a skill that the Cathari could not match. striking twice with perfect precision before restoring the gravity and letting the dead bodies crash to the floor. 5 down, Marcus said as he caught his breath behind a stack of cargo containers. 7 to go. By now the remaining Cathari had begun to realize that something was terribly wrong. They reached out through their telepathic link and found only silence where their packmates should have been. And for the first time in their existence as perfect killing machines, they felt a cold spike of fear pierce their ancient confidence. Something was hunting them. Something that moved through the darkness like a shadow and killed without warning and vanished before they could strike back. They gathered together in the main concourse and clicked their mandibles in confused agitation, their compound eyes scanning every corner for any sign of the threat that had already taken half their pack. But they saw nothing, because Marcus had learned to be patient in a way that the Cathari could never understand. He watched them from a ventilation grate high above the concourse floor, and he counted their numbers and studied their positions and planned his next move with the careful precision of a chess master, thinking 10 steps ahead. The Cathari were scared now, and scared predators made mistakes. Marcus smiled in the darkness, and it was not a nice smile. He slipped away from the grate and made his way toward the reactor control room, where he would set the trap that would even the odds once and for all. 2 more Cathari died along the way, caught alone as they searched for the mysterious killer. And Marcus added their deaths to his count with the same cold efficiency that had marked every kill before them. 7 down, he said as he cleaned the blood from his pen on the uniform of the last fallen alien. 5 to go. The pen had been a gift from his grandfather, a simple tool made of steel and memory and love. And now it had become something else entirely. It had become the weapon of a human who had decided that he would not die on this station, that he would not let his friends die on this station, and that he would make the Cathari pay for every drop of blood they had spilled. Marcus reached the reactor control room and began to work on the console with fingers that moved with speed and certainty. And as he rerouted the coolant systems and adjusted the thermal regulators, he thought about what his grandfather would say if he could see him now. Old man would probably smile that knowing smile of his and nod with quiet pride, because he had always known that his grandson had the heart of a warrior hidden beneath his quiet exterior. A human does not need the biggest claws, Marcus whispered as he completed the final sequence. A human just needs the sharpest mind. He stepped back from the console and looked at the flashing warning lights that indicated the trap was set. And then he turned and walked out of the reactor room to face the final 5. Cathari, it was time to finish what they had started, and Marcus Cole was going to make sure that the entire galaxy remembered what happened when you underestimated a human. The Alpha was the oldest of the Cathari pack, and she had been killing prey species across the galaxy for longer than most civilizations had existed. She had led 1,000 hunts and claimed 1,000,000 lives, and never once in all those centuries had she experienced a feeling that now crawled through her ancient mind like a swarm of biting insects. Fear. She reached out through the telepathic link that connected her to her pack and found only emptiness where 7 of her hunters should have been, their minds snuffed out like candles in a storm. And the silence was louder than any scream she had ever heard. Impossible, she hissed through her mandibles as she gathered the remaining 4 hunters around her in the central atrium of the station. We are Cathari. We are the perfect predators. Nothing can kill us like this. But something had killed them. Something that moved through the darkness of this station like it owned every shadow. And the Alpha could feel its presence, even though she could not see it. She tasted the air with her sensors and caught a scent that she had never encountered before. A mixture of salt and iron and something else that seemed to burn with a strange energy. It was the scent of the human. The Alpha had heard stories about this species from the traders and smugglers who dealt with her kind in the dark spaces between civilized systems. And she had always dismissed those stories as the exaggerations of weak minds. Humans were supposed to be soft and slow and fragile, barely more than prey animals who had somehow stumbled their way into space. And the idea that one of them could be responsible for the deaths of 7 HFY warriors was laughable, but the Alpha was not. Laughing now, she arranged her 4 remaining hunters in a defensive formation around the central atrium, covering every entrance and exit with their compound eyes. And she waited for the human to reveal himself. She did not have to wait long. Marcus walked into the atrium through the main entrance with his hands hanging loose at his sides. And he looked so small and weak compared to the massive aliens that surrounded him that the Alpha almost felt insulted. This was the creature that had killed 7 of her finest warriors? This little thing with its soft skin and flat teeth and pathetic body that had no claws or armor or venom. "So you are the hunter who has been stalking my pack," the Alpha said through her translator as she stepped forward to tower over the human. "I must admit I expected something more impressive." Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held no fear, and the Alpha felt a strange chill run through her exoskeleton at the emptiness she saw in that gaze. "You expected wrong," Marcus said in a voice as calm as still water. "Your kind always does." The Alpha clicked her mandibles in what passed for laughter among her species. But there was no real humor in the sound. "You are brave for such a small creature," she admitted. "But bravery will not save you now, human. You are surrounded by 5 HFY hunters and you have nowhere to run." "I know," Marcus said simply. "Then you know that you are going to die." "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But I am not the one who should be worried about death right now." The Alpha tilted her head in confusion, her compound eyes studying the human for any sign of the weapons or tricks that he must surely have hidden somewhere, but she saw nothing except a tired young male in a bloody uniform, standing alone against 5 of the most perfect killers in the galaxy. "You have no weapons," the Alpha observed. "You have no allies. You have no escape route. And yet you stand there as if you have already won this fight." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the steel pen that had killed 7 HFY warriors. And he held it up so that the Alpha could see the dark blood that still stained its surface. "I have this," he said. The Alpha stared at the tiny object in disbelief, her mind struggling to accept what she was seeing. "A writing tool?" she asked incredulously. "You killed 7 of my hunters with a writing tool?" "It belonged to my grandfather," Marcus said as he rolled the pen between his fingers, "and his grandfather before that. And it has been in my family for over 200 years. This is impossible." The Alpha growled as her confusion began to turn into rage. "No species can defeat the HFY with such primitive means. We are the apex predators of this galaxy." "No," Marcus said softly. "You are not." He looked around at the 5 hunters who surrounded him, and then he looked back at the Alpha with something like pity in his eyes. "You think you are apex predators because you were born with all these advantages," Marcus said. "Your armor and your claws and your eyes that can see in the dark. But real apex predators are not born. They are made." "What do you mean?" the Alpha demanded. "I mean that my species started with nothing," Marcus explained in that same calm voice. "We had no claws, so we made knives. We had no armor, so we learned to hide. We had no speed, so we learned patience. And we had no strength, so we learned to think." Marcus paused and looked down at the pen in his hand. "Every advantage you have was given to you by evolution," he continued. "But every advantage my species has was earned through millions of years of struggle and pain and death. And that made us something that you will never understand." "And what is that?" the Alpha asked. "Despite herself, survivors," Marcus said. "We are survivors, and survivors do not give up. They do not surrender, and they do not die quietly." The Alpha felt another chill run through her body as she realized That the human was not afraid of her. He was not afraid because he had already accepted that he might die. And that acceptance had freed him from the fear that should have paralyzed any prey animal facing a superior predator. "You are still going to die," the Alpha said. But her voice lacked the confidence it had held before. "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But you forgot something important." "What?" Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf showing its teeth. "You forgot to ask why I let myself get surrounded," he said behind the Cathari. The reactor warning lights began to flash red, and a high-pitched alarm started to scream through the atrium as the temperature began to climb rapidly toward critical levels. The Alpha spun around to look at the flashing lights, and when she turned back to the human, she finally understood the truth that had been staring her in the face since the beginning of this hunt. She had never been the predator on this station. She had always been the prey. The trap had been set hours ago when Marcus had first entered the reactor control room, and now it sprang with a fury that shook the entire station to its foundations. Superheated plasma began to vent through the floor grates of the central atrium, pumping wave after wave of searing heat into the air as the temperature climbed from comfortable to unbearable in the span of a few heartbeats. The Cathari screamed. It was a sound that Marcus had never heard before. A high-pitched shriek of pure agony that came from creatures who had never experienced real pain in their entire existence. And it echoed through the atrium like the cry of demons being cast into fire. The Cathari had evolved on a frozen moon where the temperature never rose above freezing, and their obsidian exoskeletons were designed to retain heat in that frigid environment, not release it now that same armor had become their tomb, trapping the superheated air against their bodies and cooking them alive from the inside out. 4 hunters collapsed one after another as their exoskeletons began to crack and split from the thermal shock, their limbs twitching and jerking as their internal organs failed from the overwhelming heat. Marcus walked through the chaos like death itself, his uniform sealed tight against his body and a wet cloth covering his mouth and nose to filter the superheated air. Humans had evolved on a planet where the temperature could swing from freezing cold to boiling hot depending on where you stood, and they had developed the ability to sweat and regulate their body temperature in ways that no other species could match. The heat that was killing the Cathari was merely uncomfortable for Marcus, and he moved through the dying aliens with the steady patience of a farmer walking through a field at harvest time. He reached the first fallen hunter and knelt beside its cracked body, and he drove his pen through its skull membrane with the same precision that had marked every kill before it. 8, he counted as he moved to the next one. 9, 11. The 4 hunters died without putting up any resistance, their bodies too damaged by the heat to even attempt to fight back. And Marcus cleaned his pen on his uniform as he turned to face the last Cathari still standing. The Alpha had survived longer than the others because her larger body could absorb more heat before failing. But she was clearly dying as she dragged herself across the floor toward the human who had destroyed her pack. Her exoskeleton was covered in cracks that glowed red with the heat trapped inside, and dark fluid leaked from a dozen wounds where her armor had split apart. "What are you?" she rasped through a translator that was barely functioning anymore. Marcus knelt beside her and looked into her compound eyes, which had dimmed from their usual bright red to a dull orange as her body began to shut down. "I am a human," he said quietly. "That is not an answer," the Alpha growled. "Humans are supposed to be weak. They are supposed to be prey. They are not supposed to be capable of this." Marcus thought about her words for a moment, and then he nodded slowly. "You are right that we are not the strongest," he admitted, "and we are not the fastest, and we are not the most armored or the most venomous or the most anything compared to most species in this galaxy." He held up his pen so that the Alpha could see the blood of her hunters staining its steel surface. "But we are the most stubborn," Marcus continued. "We are the most patient. We are the most adaptable, and we are the most willing to do whatever it takes to survive." The Alpha let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a dying gasp. "You killed 12 HFY warriors with a writing tool," she said. "My species has conquered worlds. We have exterminated entire civilizations. And you killed us with a stick." "It is not about the weapon," Marcus said. "It is never about the weapon. It is about the mind that uses it." He placed the pen against the membrane at the base of her skull. And the Alpha did not try to stop him. "My grandfather told me something before I left Earth," Marcus said softly. "He said that a human does not need the biggest claws. A human just needs the sharpest mind and the will to use it. Your grandfather was wise." The Alpha admitted. "He was human," Marcus replied. "And this is what humans do." He pushed the pen through the membrane. And the last HFY died with something like respect in her fading eyes. Marcus stood up slowly and looked around at the destruction he had caused, at the cracked bodies of the 12 perfect predators who had thought they were hunting easy prey. The heat was beginning to fade as the emergency venting system cycled through its cooldown protocol, and the warning lights shifted from red to amber as the danger passed. Marcus walked out of the atrium and made his way to the safe room where the surviving cadets had barricaded themselves. And he pressed the emergency release that opened the reinforced door. Crix was the first one out, his massive reptilian body covered in wounds from a fight that he had clearly lost. And he stared at Marcus with eyes that held a mixture of disbelief and something that looked almost like awe. "The HFY," Crix said in a voice that trembled slightly. "Did you really kill them all?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "With what?" Marcus held up his grandfather's pen, and Crix stared at it for a long moment before letting out a laugh that shook his entire body. "A pen," Crix said. "You killed 12 apex predators with a pen. It was my grandfather's." "Marcus," replied Crix, looked at the human for a long moment. And then he did something that Marcus had never expected. He bowed his massive head in a gesture of respect that his species only showed to the greatest warriors. "I was wrong about your kind," Crix said quietly, "and I will never make that mistake again." 3 days later, the rescue ships finally arrived and found a station full of survivors who all told the same impossible story about a human cadet who had hunted the hunters and killed the killers with nothing but a pen and his bare hands. The report was classified at the highest levels of the Galactic Union, but the story spread anyway, whispered from species to species across 1,000 worlds, until it became a legend that parents told their children when they asked why humans were allowed to join the Union. "Never underestimate a human," they would say. "They do not have claws or fangs or armor, but they have something far more dangerous. They have minds that never stop thinking and wills that never stop fighting. And they will kill you with a pen and make you thank them for the honor." And somewhere on a small blue planet called Earth, an old man sat in his favorite chair and smiled as he watched the news report about his grandson. "The hero of Station Helix 9, that's my boy," the grandfather whispered as he looked at the empty space on his desk where his pen used to sit. "I always knew you had it in you." The stars burned cold and distant in the night sky outside his window. But the old man felt nothing but warmth in his heart as he thought about what his family's pen had accomplished. It had started as a simple tool for writing words, and now it had written a legend that would last forever, and that was the most human thing of all.